Hello, everyone. Welcome to Concordia University's Fourth Space, and thank you for joining us for a lightning round Q&A with John Davies and Geoffrey Little about the recent publication of More Voiceover, Colin Campbell writings. I'll pass it over to John and Geoffrey in a moment, but first, to help situate you, we are streaming to YouTube Live from Fourth Space, which is located on unceded Indigenous lands in Jojage, Montreal. At Space, we work with our university community to mobilize knowledge by co-creating daily activities, conversations such as this one, that invite Concordians together with external partners, audience members, in order to examine research questions, ideas, and projects in development here at the university. That's it for me. Over to you, John and Geoffrey. Welcome.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you, Anna. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, John. I will briefly introduce John. John and I know each other very well, but John is the editor of More Voiceover, Colin Campbell Writings, which was published in early summer 2021 by Concordia University Press, and it is the second book in the press's award-winning artist writing series. The first book came out in 2020 by Ken Lum. Colin Campbell's book, edited by John, came out in 2021, and in October 2022, we published a collection by Liz Magor that we launched recently in Vancouver. John worked on this book with me for a number of years, but he is also soon to be a PhD, a newly minted PhD.
Yeah, my degree was conferred yesterday.
Oh, congratulations,
So, yeah.
John. John completed his doctorate at Stanford while he was editing this book. And before his PhD work, he was a curator at a number of important art museums in Canada, including the Power Plant and the AGO. So John, this book has been out for a year and a half now. You've had some time to think about your work, its accomplishments. Tell us how you think about the book at this point in time, and how you're thinking about Colin Campbell and his work have evolved in the last sort of 16, 18 months.
Right. Yeah. Well, I guess maybe I'll start by saying that it's really wonderful to be back at Concordia. I got my BFA here in 2002. I studied cinema and interdisciplinary studies and sexuality here, and was first introduced to Colin's work in Nelson Henriks's video art history and theory class when I was a child of 19 years old. And so, yeah, it's been kind of a lifelong relationship with Colin's work. And yeah, I think, just seeing the book come out, seeing how big it ended up being, how substantial his kind of body of work is when you render it in text, was really exciting. I think a lot of focus has been put on kind of the form and kind of formal qualities of video, but I've always been really interested in it as kind of tool for play and social activity and self-fashioning and self-creation, and also just for kind of tracing talk and conversations and kind of gossip and the things that kind of create communities. And so, yeah, I think, it's had a very positive response, I think, especially from people who knew Colin and his work personally or were his students. And I also had the opportunity to meet his brother and his brother's family recently, and that kind of added this whole other dimension. He grew up in this very small town of Reston, Manitoba, and one of the first entries in the book is these very early stories from Reston, and one of them includes this very kind of dramatic story of a local boy in town who hung himself wearing his mother's dress, and this figure of the kind of queer child whose life was cut short kind of haunts Colin throughout his life and work. So actually hearing from Colin's brother that these were true stories and just kind of his recording of them, I think it really it's almost like this primal scene or like this kind of sparking event and childhood experience that ends up kind of being like an engine for the whole book and the whole his whole practice, I think, of using video to kind of examine power dynamics, sexuality, gender, all of these things. So, and kind of the way time always turns back on itself and is cyclical feels very relevant to now as well.
So people who are joining us now or who are going to listen to this, watch this in the future, likely know who Colin Campbell is, but many people may not. He's a pioneering video artist in the 70s, 80s, 90s, but also, as you discovered, he's a novelist. He writes a cultural critic, active in the artist-run center movement. Can you give us his boilerplate kind of biography?
Yeah. So grew up and first studied art in Manitoba, and then went to California to get his MFA, and started working with video equipment at Mount Allison University in New Brunswick. Video equipment that he borrowed from the physical education department, where they used it to record and play back football games and whatever happens in football. I'm not sure how that works.
Touchdowns.
Yeah, something like that. And he very early on created this persona that he called Art Star, that was kind of very stripped down, like he is physically just kind of his head and shoulders speaking into the camera, playing this character named Art Star, who is very, the local celebrity in Sackville, New Brunswick. And it's kind of, I think, a way of kind of exploring queer identity through kind of the figure of the artist. And so in a kind of more covert way. And he went on to make work for about 30 years. He passed away in 2001, and really putting kind of performance and narrative at the center of his work. So creating these personas that basically tell stories. And so there's often very little action or activity. It's more that you're listening to a raconteur, and just that kind of capaciousness of storytelling that you can kind of bring in anything through storytelling. I think that ended up being his main focus. And so later in life he starts writing novels, which were unpublished. And I think just it became clear that writing was kind of the central component, and what was always kind of driving the work. But it's always kind of storytelling as a way of kind of exploring the self and kind of social dynamics and power. And he had this idea of external versus internal fiction. So the idea of there being, not really a line between fiction and nonfiction, but that the self is kind of collage of, experiences or things overheard, or bits and pieces that we pull from life and social experience, and that's what the self is constructed from. But fiction is a big part of how we construct ourselves as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is in some ways a trite question, but what did you, obviously someone who knows a lot about Campbell and his work, before you started this project, what surprised you? How did your thinking about Campbell change or evolve, or what maybe how was it challenged in some ways in the process of this project, putting the writings together, thinking about them in their discreteness, but also thinking about them as a whole?
Well, I think just looking at everything chronologically, like you really see these kind of threads develop and important kind of catalyzing moments in his life. And something that I really identified with, and think that other people will as well, is how the AIDS crisis was this moment of kind of focusing his work and really trying to understand what he could do as an artist to not only kind of feel grief about the loss of students and friends and loved ones, but also use his art for, to achieve like political ends and for activism. And I don't think he was naturally an activist, but I think like a lot of people, the AIDS crisis really pushed people to kind of understand that they had to do something. Like it was, and something I found interesting was he created his only 16 millimeter film, so working with celluloid rather than videotape, with a piece called Skin. And it's an homage to the women with AIDS who spoke at the International AIDS Conference in Montreal, I believe in 1989. And he kind of wanted to recreate that with performers. But I think it was tricky because I feel like he lost his own voice a bit in that project. And so I think it's just a really great kind of example of maybe the tensions or the difficulties of artists who are maybe, especially with somebody like Colin, very internally focused and kind of making work about themselves, to then actually try to bring in the social world and bring in politics is actually like quite fraught and complicated. And I think actually his most successful response was a short story called Noise, and it was published in the catalog for his first retrospective, curated by Bruce Ferguson. And there he's really grappling with this feeling of basically like it's time to make some noise, and responding to the ACT UP slogan, silence equals death. So it's kind of like, you need to make some noise, Colin.
When I read that, it was very much get your act together.
Right.
But I also love that piece, his lecture at MoMA on election night 1980, I believe, when it was Jimmy Carter against Ronald Reagan. And I think he has a great foresight, and he can see into the future in some ways, because the Reagan years were brutal for so many constituencies and communities, including gays and lesbians and other sexual minorities in the United States. And in some ways, he imagines a future that isn't a Reaganite America, and it's really quite beautiful at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, he's shocked that anyone came to his screening at all, because this is actually election night itself, and so the votes would have been being tallied while they were in the auditorium at MoMA together. Yeah, I mean, I think certainly Reagan is vilified among AIDS activists and queer communities, and for this complete neglect of the disease because of the populations that it affected. I think now in the United States, there's a lot of conversation about his deinstitutionalizing of people with mental health issues, and also, of course, this promise of trickle-down economics that the trickle never seemed to arrive 40 years later. And yeah, I think Colin understood that even just symbolically having somebody who was a Hollywood actor as president would be kind of a bad precedent.
Yeah, a different kind of art star.
Yeah, exactly. I think he understood that, he's so perceptive about media and about the use of television, mass media, the image to create a persona. So I'm sure he saw right through what Reagan was trying to do, and was probably horrified to see the public eat it up.
Well, he also took pot shots closer to home. So Mary Brown, who ran the Ontario Censor Film Board, or was the head of the government body that had to censor, or rather rate every film, give it a rating. He took aim at her very specifically.
Yeah, well, they actually they were a censor board originally, and then they toned down their title to the Film Review Board. But yes, this woman, Mary Brown, is very powerful in Ontario, and there was a moment, I believe, in the early 1980s where she, maybe it was the late 1970s, where she realized that artists and experimental film and video makers were making work, and that they were showing in places like the AGO or in small spaces, but they were not coming under the eye of the censor. And so she really tried to widen the reach of the censor board, and that was really like a galvanizing political moment for media artists in Toronto, and supported by artists elsewhere in Canada. Actually, late Michael Snow was pulled into it with I believe his film Rameau's Nephew, and it was really Ontario at the time was not the most progressive place, so it really
still isn't.
Yeah. Yeah, so it was that was actually another movement that he was very involved in. I think that was that was so much about artists' freedom of expression and freedom of where they would show their work, and also protecting these small community spaces that didn't have the resources to be looping the government into every screening that they were doing. Yeah, and I love a tape called Snip Snip, where he plays this like very enthusiastic censor, Mary Brown, with her scissors. And so we see her cutting up a Danish import called Lesbian Picnic, and she's there with a group of concerned citizens from the Anti-Foot Fetish League, the Citizens for Decency, and the SPCA, and they all have their own reasons for cutting the scene, like, oh, this squirrel shouldn't be allowed to see these lesbians. And so it was it's a really kind of joyous kind of piece of parody and activism, I think.
Yeah.
And he really he didn't really understand how to be a man, and he really identified much more with women, and was very more comfortable creating personas that were women and kind of writing as a woman. And I just find it really interesting that there's something extremely kind of organic about his drag. Like, it doesn't feel kind of mocking or like a burlesque, but actually like creating very precise characters. So I think Mary Brown is maybe the most like parodic, but it's kind of not. It's more around class, and I think like whiteness as well, than it is around gender, and also these communities. This video art community in Toronto is very kind of very like kind of feminist and very queer in kind of orientation. And so I just really appreciate that that's the that it's this kind of like collective mockery of this like abuse of power, basically. But even I think the law is still on the books, or was even enforced until relatively recently in Ontario, where you had to apply for an exemption if you were the Toronto International Film Festival or something like that. You actually had to still go to the government to register that you were showing films and get an exemption, and one still had to jump through those hoops. And then there were famous more recent censorship cases, like Catherine Breillat's film Fat Girl. So it isn't all ancient history.
So the book has many of Campbell's scripts. There's lecture notes. There's critical writings. There's things for popular publications, but also excerpts from 2 unpublished novels. So talk to us about Campbell as the novelist and those 2 projects.
Yeah, I really love the novels. They're very kind of pulpy. Like they're almost like I don't know, adventure serials
Yeah.
from like early in the history of film or something like that. The protagonists in both novels, The Lizard's Bite and Disappearance, are both really clearly Campbell surrogates. But the novel format allows for this really, really, really extensive character development. And so in the videos where he's creating character out of a turn of phrase or a gesture or kind of through performance here, it's this really kind of sustained character development. And they're really concerned with these kind of questions of kind of reincarnation and the kind of span of a lifetime, and how kind of historical figures like say Caravaggio like have these kind of echoes or resonances into the present day. And so there's kind of a direct connection with the videos that he was making in the late 1990s. And he didn't know that he was going to pass away in the next few years, but they feel like culminating works where he's reflecting back on his life. And so he actually kind of returns to old tapes and puts different personas that he created kind of in dialogue with each other and kind of creating new relationships and new scenarios for them. And so it becomes this whole kind of hall of mirrors of these different personas. And so, I think it was quite profound. Like there's been a lot of like work, on say like hauntology or in like queer temporality and things like that. And these works feel very prescient in terms of like that body of thought. And also the way his influence has continued. He taught for a number of years, primarily at the University of Toronto, and had very formative impact on so many students who went on to become video artists and artists themselves. And also just the way that his personas kind of have a longevity and almost have their own presence, especially within the Toronto art community. Figures like Art Star, but also the woman from Malibu, who this persona he developed over 5 tapes in is it 5 or 6 tapes in
there's a test after.
Yeah, exactly, it's a quiz in Los Angeles in the late 70s. Also this character Robin, who kind of represented this kind of girl from the suburbs discovering the world of Toronto kind of new wave music and underground culture. So I think people especially of his generation, but also students, like people like Robin or the woman from Malibu have like a role in their lives. And there's an understanding that like these fictions have like a real presence and like become part of communities and people. I read an essay a long time ago, and the title was "Can Films Be Friends?" And I've always thought about that idea of like artworks as friends, basically, or as participants in a community, or something that we can actually have deep relationships with. So
yeah, I love Robin is maybe my favorite character, and she takes such joy in working at the TD Center in Toronto,
right.
And it captures a particular moment, I think, in time, and in some ways it resonates with someone who grew up in Southern Ontario and then moved to Toronto in the late 90s. And Toronto was like Berlin in the 20s for someone growing up in the sticks, relatively. So it's a beautiful kind of creation of the glamour that certain parts of Toronto have, but then you peep around the corner and it's not as posh as one imagines.
I could add to that, maybe.
Please.
Like just the I think especially for kind of queer artists scenes and communities in Toronto, there's always been this sense of having to create something out of scratch
Right.
because the status quo was so kind of Protestant and unyielding and unfriendly. And so his work really kind of taps into this longer lineage of people like General Idea, or
Yeah.
like the queercore movement around Bruce LaBruce and Judy Jones, and up to people like Will Monroe or Louis Jacob.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
this need to find glamour where one one does not see it around oneself. So.
Well, there's a great piece, and I forget now if he's writing it as himself or he's writing it as a character, but he's covering a show at the Horseshoe, and it's he name drops every which way he possibly can, and it's really quite beautiful, and again really evocative. Speaking of people that he either worked with or influenced or he knew, he had a significant collaboration with Lisa Steele, and you've curated an exhibition that looks at their work or their time, particularly in Los Angeles in 76, 77. I almost ran over Liza Minnelli today, which was in Montreal and just recently opened at the Orr Gallery in Vancouver. So talk to us about Steele and Campbell, because there's a beautiful several photos of the two of them in the book, and it's really beautiful and evocative, and I've seen some of the films that they've worked on together, and it seemed like a really magical partnership in many ways.
Yeah, so they met in Toronto in the mid 1970s, and they both had created really important work by that point. But they I think wanted a break from Toronto, and I tend to really like glamorize these artist communities and scenes or romanticize them, but I think they could also be quite small.
Yeah.
And so they got a Canada Council grant, and they used it to
Leave Canada.
Yeah. And so they put all their video equipment and clothes into a Volkswagen or a Volvo. I'll have to look that up. And drove out to Los Angeles. So Colin had done his MFA outside of Los Angeles, and had friends there. And Lisa was American but hadn't been to the West Coast before. And so they lived in Venice Beach, in this house that I actually went on a pilgrimage to recently to take pictures of what it looked like now. And it was basically like that's what you call like a live work space. So they lived there, but they also they each created a number of new video pieces while they were there. And so they were working independently, and they tended not to even run ideas by each other. It was like quite independent, but they were doing everything there together socially. And so they kind of saw themselves as anthropologists in the world of Southern California in the late 70s, which was quite a different landscape than Toronto. And so I really love this idea that they were having the same experiences and absorbing the same kind of cultural information, but then it was being filtered and processed through their distinct points of view. And so Colin made this series based on this persona of the woman from Malibu, and then Lisa made a really wonderful series called The Scientist Tapes, kind of responding to the almost celebrity or kind of media role that scientists were increasingly playing at the time, which it really resonated during the COVID-19 pandemic. So yeah, the exhibition, I originally created it for a contemporary gallery space that's part of the One LGBT archive at the University of Southern California. So I wanted to gather all this work that they made in Los Angeles over this 9-month period and actually return it to Los Angeles and kind of reintroduce it kind of into the art history of the city, because they had shown there when they lived there, but weren't really part of the story. Okay. And also introducing it to new audiences and looking at specifically in queer context, because not only Colin, who was bi, or we might even say pan or polysexual, and also like very androgynous and I don't know. I don't like taking contemporary labels and imposing them on history, but perhaps non-binary or somewhere on a trans spectrum. And then Lisa as well, who was in this romantic relationship with Colin, was also exploring queer sexuality and gender in her work as well. And so I wanted to return it to that, create a kind of queer context for it. And then it toured to Vox here in Montreal, and actually the entire installation happened, on Zoom. The opening event happened on Zoom, so it was all a very like remote experience for me. I was at school in California, and the entire run of the show I was in California. So yeah, and then we just but having it be up during the pandemic with Lisa's scientist tapes was really striking, I think. And then it's actually currently at the Orr Gallery in Vancouver until the end of the month. So we installed it in November, and Lisa came to do like a conversation with me at the opening, like we had done in Los Angeles, and that was actually where Colin's brother and sister-in-law and nieces came, and it was really,
amazing.
I think, especially for Lisa, very kind of intense and profound experience.
Absolutely.
Also, it was a very kind of intergenerational group in Vancouver. The media art, history and legacies and artist-run culture there, so rich, and so there are people of all ages there, and I think I'm learning that working with this material feels historical for me, but it's not historical for the artists who made it as part of their lives.
Absolutely.
And so I'm always trying to navigate, like, how do you work with these archives or histories like in a respectful way, and nobody wants to be seen just in retrospect. It's part of like ongoing continuities. And so yeah, I mean, going through Colin's archives for the book was really very moving, just the quantity of like personal letters. He was we didn't end up including a lot of letters in the book, but they were very valuable kind of in the research. And he had a very close relationship with the artist and filmmaker John Grayson, and they lived actually between, John was in Los Angeles and Colin was in Toronto. And so normally you're not writing letters to the love of your life if you're in the same home or the same city, but when you're in different cities, it all ends up in writing for the future art historian to dig through. So yeah, I really it feels like a huge privilege to be granted access to this material and these stories, because there's not really any separation between the life and the work with artists like Campbell. And so I think that's why it's perennially kind of interesting to me.
So I want to ask you about video art in general. And so Campbell, Steele, really incredible, important Canadian video makers. How easy is it to access Campbell's works? I know you can order them through VTape. Obviously, they are priced appropriately as artistic works. But thinking about museums and galleries that aim for big blockbuster shows or that try and bring in the masses, it seems like video art still in many ways is off to the corner. Talk to us about the place of video art in the contemporary climate.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I think of video or moving image work as like absolutely central to contemporary art now, but I think it's also, we've seen since the 90s a real kind of rise in production values and kind of the it kind of gets bigger and bigger. Like it's like called on to fill in bigger and bigger spaces in museums and take on this kind of grand scale. And so when you have something from the mid 1970s that's black and white that was made with, what to us seems like extremely primitive technology, but which at the time was extremely advanced technology. It can be hard for people to kind of maybe have the attention span or the kind of for that work to really have like the presence that it deserves. I'm really interested in the idea of early video almost as like akin to newsprint or something that nobody knew what the lifespan of these things was going to be. I mean, the fact that there's still an image to see at all 50 years later is pretty remarkable because it feels extremely fragile, and there's only a handful of people, including Lisa Steele's current partner, Kim Tomzak, who actually, know how to preserve a video and make that, a mission in their lives to preserve this kind of work. But something I'm curious about is how much people find it on YouTube and places like that, which, unofficially or illicitly, end up there. But it does give things like a availability that they wouldn't otherwise have, because generally I would say that they're not shown, the historical work isn't shown that often in museums these days. So I'm all for people being able to access this work however they can, and it somehow feels appropriate that a fan would like upload something to YouTube and that it stays up there maybe for a few months before it's taken down. But I think the ways we find these things to like especially in the past were very circuitous. Like I remember growing up in Montreal in like the mid to late 90s as a queer person, and kind of where you could find these artistic works and legacies, and like it took a bit of work. It's like I remember stumbling across VHS tapes of actually John Grayson film and Kenneth Anger's films, in like a Cégep library, but it wasn't necessarily something that everyone could find.
No.
So yeah.
Well, I think now it's easy to find stuff, but it's perhaps not good stuff, right? The stuff that is easy to find, is easy to consume, but perhaps doesn't have a lot of staying power.
And also, just because you can Google anything, it doesn't mean you know what to Google, or like somebody still has to tell you, the name before you can understand, that artist or get to know them. But yeah.
So Campbell taught U of T. I think he also taught at other institutions in Toronto sessionally, but had a longer relationship with U of T. Tell me about his legacy as a teacher and his work, and what you've gleaned or learned from students that he worked with.
Yeah, I mean, I think all artists, you're kind of pulled in multiple directions when you're a teaching artist, and so there's the, not just the teaching, but also the, the service and administration you're expected to do, and then also, wanting to give the proper time and energy to your own work. But I mean, there's just so many people who had really kind of he just he was such a kind of wry and kind of witty figure. Like I feel like I can just imagine him, like what he would be like in the classroom, and kind of supportive, but also keeping you on your toes.
And at a very not very, but an institution that has a reputation for conservatism and a highbrowness that is perhaps absent from many other institutions as well.
Yeah. I'm not sure what exactly the kind of tone of the fine arts department was like there when he was there, but I mean, something that I find really intriguing and interesting is there's been several kind of projects of like reanimating or reimagining his work by younger artists. So either being commissioned or artists, creating a work that in homage to him. And so I feel like that, you know, I'm just really interested in those kind of intergenerational dialogues and the way that the not just the work but the person and the persona kind of continues to animate younger artists' work. And a lot of the examples that I can recall are kind of more in the past. So I'm curious if that's something that's going to continue. Like I would hope the book could like play a small role in like continuing that. I'd be really curious to know kind of how much the work is taught or what the kind of interest is around the history of video art in Canadian art schools and universities, just because video is so has become so much like kind of the center of contemporary art now. It's not really its own field, like distinct field anymore. So just to another to recognize again Nelson Henricks and this history and theory of video class here at Concordia, really introducing us like when we were 19 or 20 years old to just a huge range of material over a 30-year period back then. And there was just I think everyone left that class with with an art, one or more artists that they were going to have like a continuing relationship with. A lot of the people in the class were practitioners themselves, and so courses like that are just so incredibly like generative and end up playing such a big role in what people's own like intellectual and artistic pursuits are going to be. And he really just had such a dynamic and kind of diverse group of artists that he was presenting to us, and it's been fun to realize how many of those artists have like continued to play a role in my life over the last 20 years, and also to now have like a friendship with Nelson, whereas before he was like a very intimidating teacher. So yeah, I love those long, that's like my favorite thing about aging, is these kind of longer timelines and like resonances that you feel develop over the decades.
Absolutely. That's a very generous praise of Nelson, who's a great teacher and great scholar and artist. So talking about long relationships, you've had a relationship with Colin Campbell since your undergrad. Right. Videos are friends, artists are friends. What's next maybe in terms of your relationship with Campbell after the book, after the exhibitions? You've spent a lot of time together. What's next in your relationship, or where do you think that research on Campbell's work could go, or what questions do people need to ask, or should they ask?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, the book ended up being so comprehensive in terms of really trying to kind of be as thorough as possible, and really trying to account for all the tapes and then all the other kind of writing. I mean, I think I really wanted it to be like a primary source for people doing research on him, and also just to appreciate how the work can kind of live on the page and not just on magnetic tape. And so I guess that gets to your question about the circulation of the work, is like I do believe that the script is a way for the work to circulate as well, even though if you do lose some aspects of it. But yeah, I think, I mean, I really just see him as kind of a touchstone, or I guess originator of what we would call like queer performance, and queer as a kind of theory and politic and something driving culture didn't really like concretize until like the late 1980s. But I feel like there's a lot of practices and work before that that is clearly kind of in that spirit. I think Douglas Crimp called it queer before gay, basically. And so I just think it's really just the kind of really like lived, deeply considered kind of exploration of his own kind of gender and sexuality and understanding it as these fluid experiences that feels like incredibly prescient to me. And so I just feel like it's important that that the work is kind of acknowledged for how it kind of created kind of queer ways of being in the world, and not just as its contribution to the arts, basically. Like that I think when you look at that side of it, it really opens things up and really recognizes like a social impact of the work, and like a kind of ongoing relevance to the work beyond its contribution to the history of video art, or the history of video art in Canada specifically. Yeah.
Great. So I know we're on Zoom. Maybe there's some questions from the audience. Anna, jump in at any point. Or we can keep talking. I could talk until the cows come home about Colin Campbell and with John Davies. I guess maybe the final question that I'll ask you is about, and I'm not fishing, but your experience as an author. So you're a scholar, you've written many times before, but I think we could say this is your first big monograph, and through the peer review process, going really from soup to nuts. And what was that like for you? And that experience of really diving in and seeing a project from just the absolute kernel to having that book in your hand.
Yeah, I mean, it was really wonderful learning experience. I think it didn't feel too overwhelming because I knew that there was like a finite quantity of videos and text to look at, and so it didn't feel like a kind of endless project. I have been working or was working on my dissertation. I started doing the research in January 2020, so 2 months before everything shut down for the pandemic. So the dissertation is about the really close intertwined relationship between artistic and sexual experimentation in the city of San Francisco, specifically between the end of World War II and the mid-1990s. And especially working on that during the pandemic, it really felt like endless. And like the research, I really felt like I was kind of drowning in the research. And I'm a bit embarrassed the dissertation ended up being 600 pages. But I was not scolded by my committee for that, thankfully. But yeah, I feel like the Campbell project just felt like a really a great way of kind of seeing through a big project, but also not being too intimidated by it, because I've been, curating or writing about his work since I think 2008. So as you said, it's a long relationship. And yeah, I think I continued really identifying as a curator throughout the art history PhD, and typically they kind of programs tend to prepare you to work more in academia than in the curatorial field. I think that's changing a lot, but historically that was certainly the case. I think professors just by reflex kind of want to kind of recreate their own trajectories with their students. And just doing the dissertation during the pandemic was really intense and kind of solitary, and so having the dissertation defense go really well in early November, like it kind of was a confidence boost in terms of like thinking of myself as a scholar.
Yep.
And I'm really excited to turn that San Francisco project into a book and an exhibition, ideally. And I think I accumulated just an enormous archive about the kind of queer and other kind of practices in San Francisco over 50 years that I think could just lead to lots of other things. And I was in Montreal, and then I was in Toronto for a long time, and then I was in the Bay Area for 6 years. And I just am really interested in the kind of echoes and resonances and parallels between these different artistic communities and legacies. And New York tends to have like this kind of gravitational pull, but I'm really interested in kind of what happens outside of that, where it's kind of things need to, as I said, be created more from scratch. And yeah, but I think I'm also working on a couple of journal articles as well, and have gone through that peer review process, and we'll be going through it again. And yeah, it's good to get in the practice of doing that. Of course.
John, thank you for joining me this morning. This is great. For our viewers and listeners at home, John's book is More Voiceover, Colin Campbell Writings, authored by Colin Campbell but edited by John, available from your favorite independent bookstore or from our website, concordia.ca/press, or you can simply Google it and you'll find a link to our distributors. So John, thank you again. This was really great to talk about this project that I think we worked on for many years before it came out, and will have a very long life as a historical artifact, collection of primary sources, but I think a really amazing entryway into Campbell and his work. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
John Davies, Geoffrey Little, thank you so much for navigating this winter wonderland here today to come into Fourth Space and have this conversation. We really appreciate your insights, your time, and your energy. So thanks again. And folks, we're going to wrap up now and close up the Zoom and the live stream. So see you next time. Bye, everybody.